Okay, so I hope most people are on board, and I want to say also that this is kind of an extra Friday webinar that we have squeezed into the schedule, and we have a full hour today as we are going to present one of our projects. So the webinar is auto-captioned, and you can use the closed captions button or CC button in Zoom to get the captions. And if you would like to ask questions to today's speaker or speakers, you can use the question and answer functionality, the Q&A. Please do not write questions in the chat. The chat is monitored for technical issues, but it's much harder for us to catch the questions there, so please do use the Q&A function. All microphones are muted to avoid background noise, and the webinar is recorded as usual and will be published at our YouTube channel after today. And my name is Susanna Lorin, and I'm the Managing Director and Chair of the Funke Foundation, and I will present my fellow speaker just in a while. So we are going to talk today about the research project called Expertise Based on Experience. And on the screen here, I'm showing a map of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and part of the other countries surrounding the Baltic Sea, and it's marked on the map where the Central Baltic Program is funding projects. So that is kind of the eastern middle part of Sweden and the southern part of Finland, and then Estonia and Latvia. And I think all in all, 29 regions are covered in this funding program. And in between those countries, there are small islands scattered in the Baltic Sea. And this project is focusing on the Stockholm region and Åland, which are kind of a partly independent part of Finland, but is situated really in the middle of the Baltic Sea, just between Sweden and Finland. We have this other type of on the map as a kind of a description of where we are. But if we don't start with the larger map, I don't think anyone outside of Sweden or Finland would recognize those regions. So if you start where I am on the east coast of the archipelago in Stockholm, and then you head towards Åland, this is what you see after a while. It's just a very, very nice day. When it's better to be in a speedboat than a sailing boat, because it's very calm, which means that you can see something of Åland after a while, but there are actually places in the middle where you don't see anything, which is a very nice place to stop your boat and take a swim. But then after a while you can see land again. So it's very close between our two countries, but still a lot of blue water in between. And also, as we could see in this project, there are also quite a few differences, even if we do speak the same language. So with me today, I have Erika Edsberg, who has promised to present about the organization Funktionsrätt Åland, which is an umbrella organization. And she's a communication manager at the organization, and she's here today on behalf of the organization to present about them, while the project lead from their side, unfortunately, is ill today, Carl Wahlman, who should have been here. And he was kind of one of the initiators of this project, but as many others are in this time of the year, he has the flu or something similar, so he is back home. So we're very happy that Erika is here to help us. That means I will do most of the talking. So for the agenda today, we are going to go through a little bit about the background of the project, why we wanted to make this happen, and then I'm going to describe the implementation of the project, the different steps, the phases that we went through, and then, of course, the result of the project. And we do not have any written reports public yet, but they will come later on. And then we will open up for questions in the end of this webinar. So the background of this is really a twofold background, if you will. With the Web Accessibility Directive, or even before that, with the increased requirements of the of the Procurement Directive in 2017, and then with the Web Accessibility Directive in 2018, and we will soon have the European Accessibility Act. We have more and more laws and requirements on accessibility for larger and larger groups, so more organizations in scope. And all of these increased requirements mean that more people need to understand accessibility and procure accessible products and services, and also make sure that they can do testing and so on. And this has led to a lack of experts and lack of expertise. And this is both on the supply side and on the demand side. This is not something that we are the only ones pointing to, but that is something that all the European member states are kind of screaming for more experts. So there is a big gap in the market where not enough people have been trained to understand accessibility in depth. And it's still the case, unfortunately, that 90-something% of the universities and other levels of training institutions and education, they do not provide training on accessibility. So every year we have new experts, ICT professionals, designers, UX designers, content creators, developers who get out of their studies or other type of vocational training studies, whatever. They take the exam, they're very good, many of them, but they do not know accessibility. And this just goes on and on and on, which means that we are all in trouble, because then there is an even bigger need of experts that come kind of afterwards and have to check and test and remediate. So the whole industry is kind of working a bit backwards. That's a problem that we didn't solve in this project, but really the lack of experts and knowledge across the board is a big problem. On the other side, we have the users. So we have large groups of end users with disabilities that have the lived experiences of inaccessibility. So when things work, you usually don't think about it. But if you have a disability, then you stumble over many things, both in the physical world, of course, but also online, where things actually don't work as they should. So this lived experience is, of course, a unique kind of input to accessibility work, and many of these people do not make their voices heard around accessibility, or may feel that I'm not technically savvy enough, or maybe I'm not interested. That's fine, but many of them tend to think that I need to be an expert in order to say something about accessibility, and we think that is kind of the other way around. Because you are an expert if you have the lived experience of inaccessibility. You may not be a technical expert or a developer, but this lived experience is really a resource and a unique competence that can be developed into something that can even become a career path in the end. We also know that as a collective in general, people with disabilities have a higher rate of unemployment than the population at large. So we have people with unique talents and unique experiences, and many of them do not have a job. Well, that is what we have on one side, and on the other side, we have this lack of experts and really a demand for more expertise. So why don't we try to bridge that and do something? We thought that, okay, we take those two things and put them together, and we not only get a win-win situation, but actually win-win-win, because if we could make more people with disabilities involved in this and provide expertise and knowledge, then we would also, as a kind of indirectly or as a next step, have more accessible interfaces and a better experience for everyone. And of course, also empowerment for people with disabilities who could then have a job and so on. So that was the background and the situation that led to us thinking that, well, maybe we should try to do something about this. Said and done. Together with Funktionsrätt Åland, the Funka Foundation set out to look for relevant and suitable funding instruments, and we found the EU-funded hub of Interreg Central Baltic. So that's the founding instrument for this project, and we got a 18 months small scale project for Interreg Central Baltic. Interreg is usually very big, large and long projects, but this is just a small one with only 2 partners. So we've had 1.5 years for the project, which is ending now in a couple of weeks, and then we have some months for the reporting. So let's start with Funktionsrätt Åland and present you as a partner. Erika, if you would like to present your organization.
Thank you, Susanna. Yes, so I am Erika Elfsberg, and I am a communication manager on Funktionsrätt Åland. And we are an advocacy organization founded in 1988, and we work for people with disabilities in Åland. We are an umbrella organization as well. We have 11 member associations, and these members are for a large part patient associations. And the total membership across all associations is 5,500 people. And that's interesting that we have on Åland 30,000 people in all. So it's a large group of Ålanders. We have an office in Mariehamn where we and the most part of our members are located. And we handle the reception and bookkeeping for them, and have events together with them, and we publish a magazine twice every year. And that's the service we have for our member associations. We work for more opportunities for participation, and our efforts are always guided by the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And advocacy. We actively work to be heard as experts, for example, on new laws. And Åland, of course, then also we have our own laws to some part as a sovereign territory. So there's Finnish laws that is here, but also our own law system. We write statements and letters to editors of newspapers. We are active on various channels where we can reach a lot of people and have contact with local politicians. We also work with awareness raising, where we educate and organize lectures about the convention and rights. We invite members and the public to meetings with authorities, for example, and participate in networks and councils, both local and for the Nordic countries. And we have events about different interesting topics that's about rights for people with disabilities. And also we work to ensure that everyone's voice is heard. And in cases where individuals have been treated poorly by authorities, we provide support and assistance to express their views and try to achieve real change. And we have something that's like an ombud. I don't know what it's in English exactly, but we have a person that will help people to have the contact with the authorities and help with these kind of things. We have also other projects apart from this one that we're talking about today. We have one project for employment, support for employment, called EPS Åland, where we have 2 job coaches that help people with disabilities to find lasting employment. And we also have an accessibility project with it's about physical accessibility on Åland, and the goal is to increase knowledge about physical accessibility to public places in Åland, and also here to create concrete and real improvements, because we see a big lack in this regard in Åland. And that's about us, and it's everything from me. So thank you for listening, and please ask questions if you have any about our organization.
Okay, thank you, Erika. So about the Funka Foundation, we are a not-for-profit organization doing independent research. We are based in Sweden, but we have staff and co-workers all over the EU, and we work very closely with user organizations, and all the research we carry out is always user-driven, so it comes very easily for us to do this kind of work where the users are really in the forefront. What we do provide is accessibility expertise, but we look at accessibility in a kind of a broad, holistic perspective. So even if the basis are people with disabilities, we are also looking into accessibility when it comes to other vulnerable groups like elderly or people with another native language and so on and so forth. So it's quite a broad provision on inclusiveness and diversity from our point of view. We do quite a lot of strategic partnership at the EU level, so working for the Commission and for the Parliament, and also at many national levels. We support the implementation of legislation and standards in many of the member states, and we do have a collaborative approach to many of the things we do. So when we want to create a project, we don't only do it on our own, but we like to work together with other organizations like end-user organizations or universities or even commercial companies sometimes. And we around 80% of what we do is research funded either by the EU or national funds, and then we do consultancy is the rest of our activities. So the basic principles of this project and where we started the whole thing is to have some very specific prerequisite when we were looking for participants. So we don't call them students, we call them participants, but they are actually students. So we were targeting persons with disabilities and people who were either in search for a job or young people that just came out of university or who wanted a career change or had an acquired disability and therefore needed to change their job. But it was people that would be more or less on the job market or soon to be on the job market, so that we could provide them with knowledge and expertise that they could use as a way into the labor market. We did not require any technical expertise, but they needed to know how to use a computer or a smartphone and how to surf the web. So this is not a kind of a computer driver's license course teaching you how to use your computer. You need to know that before, but you do not need to know anything about how the computer works or the code or anything like that. So we wanted to make sure that this was people interested in using technology, but they shouldn't be kind of technical experts. That's not the idea. Some of the ones that did apply had a very deep interest, and some were completely new to the whole thing. So we had a very broad perspective there. But that's a key aspect of this, that we did not require any knowledge about the technical parts. We wanted to make sure that we had a group with a wide variety of abilities, because one of the key components here was to learn from each other's disabilities, and so to have this broad perspective. So often when we talk about digital accessibility, it becomes either only for visually impaired, or if it's a video with captions or something, then people think only about hearing impaired and so on. And we wanted to make sure that we had a holistic view on this. So we wanted to make sure that we had in the group of people that we approved to be part of this, that we had a wide variety of abilities. Of course, we also wanted to have kind of equality between the two regions, so that we have equally number of people from both sides of the little water, and if possible, also gender equality and so on and so forth. The idea was always to start with the lived experience. So I myself have a visual impairment, and then if I were to go this course, I would just start there. So we wanted to know that the user would feel comfortable in, this is the way I use the internet, and this is what I think is difficult. And then while adding on, okay, what is just kind of an opinion, or what is difficult for me, and what is actually a legal requirement, and try to define the standard way of looking at technical recommendations or technical requirements. So something that I perceive as difficult may or may not be a legal requirement, and it's easy to kind of mix up the two, but it's very important for the website owner to understand if we are talking about a minimum requirement in the law or something that just a person just has an opinion on. Even if the opinions are also important, we still need to make a clear distinction. So after starting with the lived experience, we then started to make them work in groups so that they actually learned from each other. And this was the big eye-opener, where they also had to describe to each other what the different barriers were, or what the challenges are, and then trying to understand each other's views on this. And sometimes it led to quite a lot of discussions. And we wanted really to make sure that they did not only study on their own, but that we had almost every week some kind of group discussion or a group homework that you did together, so that the experiences across those different disabilities became clear to everyone, and that everyone learned also from the other group members. And the focus was, again, to have non-technical testing procedures. So we picked the requirements that are possible to test without having technical background, and taught 1 or 2 requirements every week to the people, to the participants, so that they then could train on each of the requirement. And the setup of this was that every Monday we had a theoretical walkthrough of 1 or 2 requirements, and then presented this week's exercise or homework. And they had then had time on the Tuesday to work on that on their own. On the Wednesday, we had a question and answer, so an open, just the teacher was just there for 2 hours and said, if somebody has a question, then jump in on this Zoom meeting and we will talk about it, and we could clarify anything that was unclear. On the Thursday, we had the submission of the homework or the exercise of the week, and so that the trainers had a possibility to look into those reports and do a follow-up and also provide feedback. And then on the Friday, we had a new meeting with the whole group where they either reported or we took some examples from the submissions and went through. So that was kind of the solution of the fact-checking on the Friday. So each week had this setup. So both theoretical and practical training in each week, and always in groups or smaller teams. The whole project was implemented by first creating a curriculum, so based on our previous experiences and also the experiences from the umbrella organization in Åland on what people should or could learn from this, what are the requirements that are possible to learn in a short period of time, but still be kind of validated enough to present to somebody. So we were creating this curriculum together in the start of the project, and then in parallel we started disseminating and providing information to end user organizations and individuals with disabilities in both countries to make sure that they knew what was going on and had information about this. And then we kicked off with the application process. So we asked people to apply to be part of this. And then we got quite a few of those applications, which we then, of course, read. And then there was written applications, and then there were interviews with the applicants that kind of fitted the requirements. And then we started the whole training process when we had a group that was holistic enough and enough of students that we could start the training. So the whole autumn, we had these training sessions, like I described, one week focusing on one thing, and then the next week kind of building on that. So we worked through what the law says, what the standard looks like, and then requirement for requirement, and how to do the testing, and then reporting. After the Christmas break, we had the pilot sessions, so where we then had 10 different authorities, because this whole legislation is based on the public sector part of the legislation, so the Web Accessibility Directive. And we had an information webinar for them also early in the autumn, and selected the pilots that we thought were most interesting. So we had also some variations with them, with local governments. We had government level authorities from different sizes. We had a culture institution, one of the more tourism oriented. We had one logged in service, which has another kind of logic to it. And we had health content as well. So we had a very wide variety of types of websites and services that we were looking into, which is good because then the participants could train and make sure that they kind of exercise what they had learned in different types of interfaces. So they did group work and individual work on the testing of each of the pilots, and then we had meetings with the pilot institutions and kind of delivered our testing results to them and had discussions on how the participants perceived the interface. And then when all the pilots got their reports and results and also the meeting where they could ask questions and so on, we then followed up so that all the pilots could provide feedback back to the participants so they could learn what was good, what could have been done more detailed, or was it possible to understand and so on. So they got something to get flying. And then we also had bilateral meetings with each of the pilot sites so that they could provide information more about the practicalities around the project and information about what we could have done better and so on. So that was, there were a lot of feedback processes and mechanisms within the whole thing. We are now in the dissemination phase where we are presenting the results of the project and also making sure that we inform the general public of what we have done, of course. And then the project will end, as I said, in a couple of weeks. And then it's time for the reporting. And we have a period of time where we will make the formal reporting. And then when everything is approved, we are also publishing the written deliverables and summaries of the results on our website. So that is kind of the implementation of the whole project. And as I said, it's 1.5 years in total. So just to give a little bit of an example of how this collaborative testing happened, because many people said in the beginning, or not many maybe, but we got some feedback in the beginning, how on earth are you going to do this? And how can you make sure that you have all these people with different kinds of accessibility needs together, and how is this going to work? So if we take one example from the EN 301549 standard, which is the presumed conformance of the Web Accessibility Directive. So there is a requirement called 9.3.3.2 about labels and instructions. And this has to do with when you have a form on the web that you need to be able to understand in which form field am I supposed to provide input, what kind of input am I supposed to provide in each form field? And that should, of course, work for all users, no matter of how you perceive or deliver information. So the testing procedures for this was that for all the students that were sighted and were using a mouse, they can then click on the label. So if you have a form field and it says name in text, and then there is a form field, then the name, the text where it says name, that is a label. So if you just tap there with your mouse or click there with your mouse, then the mouse pointer automatically ends up standing a little blinking like this in the adjacent form field. So that is a very non-technical way of checking that the label is connected to the correct form field. You can, of course, also look in the code, but we did not want people to be, or we did not require anyone to understand HTML. So this is a kind of a non-technical way of doing the same test. And that was done by people who did not use assistive technology and were sighted and were using a mouse. The students we had who were using assistive technology, like screen readers, for example, or magnification, they were then doing the same test, but without kind of clicking on the label, but they could then instead understand if the label and the form field was connected, because otherwise it doesn't work in the assistive technology. So both groups could do testing, or both categories of users can test the same requirements, but in different ways. And in some requirements, of course, we also provided tools like contrast testing tools and things like that. There are also tools where you can see if the alternative text is there and so on. So we use those kind of tools as well, but most of the testing could be done completely without any technical knowledge. And then when all parts have been testing kind of the same type of requirement, then we go on and say, okay, is it possible to understand this label? What is it that I'm supposed to fill in here? So name may be easy, but sometimes you need more information. For example, if it's a phone number or a postal code, then there may be a requirement on exactly how to provide this information. Otherwise, the system will spit it out and provide an error message. So everyone could then have a discussion on, is this understandable? Could there be more information? Would there be other ways of providing that information? For example, is this a mandatory requirement or not? So all of this made sure that each of the users could test to kind of provided or based on their own previous prerequisites and abilities and knowledge and experience. And then together they could figure out whether the requirement was met or not. And here we were looking for not only if the requirement was met, but also actually opinions on how did they perceive this? Was it easy or was it not easy? And just, is it understandable? That is a very subjective topic, of course. So the result of this collaborative testing methodology was either a pass, a fail, or a warning. And a pass is, of course, that we could not find any mistakes. That doesn't mean that nothing is wrong, but it means like the spot checks that we were doing on this particular requirement, we couldn't find any errors, so therefore the requirement has a pass. If it's a fail, that means that we have found problems or issues with this particular requirement, and then we documented where the fail was, and we took a screenshot or had a link or both, so we could report on exactly where this mistake was, and then we described it, documented what the issue was. And sometimes there are gray zones, so not everything is as clear as a pass or a fail, but there could also be a warning. That could be that we saw that most of the instances of these objects, for example, were okay, but some places they were not. And then we thought, this may not be kind of a systematic error, but just one person making a mistake or somebody not having the time or something like that. Or it could be that it's actually kind of legally a pass, but it's not really well done. It could be better. We would recommend that it was improved, and then we could provide a warning instead. All of this was done independently by the participants and then quality assured by us in the project team. We didn't change any of the opinions. We sometimes question things, but we wanted the reporting to be from the participants, so we didn't change any wording or anything like that, but we made it clear what was a legal requirement and what was maybe just an opinion or a recommendation, because those two are important for the website owner acting as pilots here, for them to know what it was. So the quality assurance was just to make sure that it was aligned with legislation and also comprehensive and coherent across the reporting, so that we were sure that all the groups were providing the same level of kind of pass-fail limitations. We made sure that each of the requirements was being tested from different angles, and so that we could provide the multiple perspectives on all of this. So not only the technical parts from the assistive technology point of view, but also how it looked for people with the reading and writing impairment, for example, or something cognitive, and how it was perceived for people with motor impairment. So we have all these multiple or holistic perspective on all the requirements, and making sure that even if no one in the group took this up, we could then add another perspective so that it became fully achievable for everyone. We made sure that we divided the reporting between legal requirements and best practices or recommendations so that it became clear. And we had in total 20 requirements from the law and a 21st that we know is important for users, but it's actually on AAA level in WCAG. So we made it clear also that we have this bonus one that we know is important for users. So in total, 21 requirements out of the 147 or whatever it is in this legislation. So a fraction of them, but still important requirements. And in the meeting, we also highlighted whether things was kind of a solid recommendation on how to do this instead, or it was more the opinions of the group or even a personal opinion, because we did not in this project have the opportunity to provide technical support and assistance on how the pilot should actually, what they should do afterwards. I mean, some things are very clear. These are not good enough contracts, then you can just change it. But if there are technical things that needs to be redone, that was not part of the project for us to support them on the actual remediation. It was also important for us to make sure that we had consensus in the group, because I think one of the worst thing if you have a report on accessibility or a report on anything is if there are experts that have a conflicting view with each other. Sometimes that can be interesting, but if the receiver of this report is going to, if it's going to be actionable, then we need to have kind of the same view on all of this. So we made sure that things that we did not agree on wasn't reported, but only things that where the whole group could say that this is something we are behind. From the student perspective, based on, we did an anonymous survey after the training. 2/3 would like to work with accessibility in the future. So I think that is a good result from this project, because not all of them may have the opportunity to do that, but at least many of them would like to. And all of them are interested in providing constructive and actionable feedback. So even if you do not have a job, a career, that means that you can provide expertise on accessibility every day, then there is, as part of this legislation, the feedback mechanism. So all end users have the right to provide feedback to website owners, and that is something we also used a lot of time on how to provide that in a constructive and actionable way. So of course, everyone is free to say this website is really bad, I hate it, but that's not very constructive maybe, and it can be hard to make that kind of negative feedback into something that becomes a solution. So we focused quite a lot on how to describe what the issue is and provide recommendations and also link to other recommendations around how to solve things. All of them can definitely provide information now in a good way from a user perspective. All of them from their own perspective, and describe what the problem is, and a majority of them also from other users' perspectives. So that is for sure something that all of them can provide after this training. And for some of them, this is definitely also a possible career path. They would then probably need more training because, again, we only walk through a proportion of the requirements. And if you are going to work as an accessibility expert, then you probably need to know more about the requirements. But there is a clear potential here for people who would like to continue working with web accessibility. And some of them they are talented in this, I would say. And we could recommend them as being recruited for this. And they're also now, I believe all of them have said yes to be part of our testing panel. So because that is one of the services that we provide, not only expertise in accessibility, but also this kind of testing with real users with disabilities. So some of them will at least be continuing working together with us providing this. From the pilot perspective, we did interviews with the pilots. So this is more of a verbal feedback, but all of them said that they learned something new about the interface of their digital service. This was under scrutiny. And a majority of them said that we thought that we had control over the technical parts. So what we got from our supplier and so on. And we thought that the feedback that we will get from this project would be more on understandability or the content or design or things like that. But all of them said that they learned something new, which means that when we have a group of users looking at the website, then they detect things that the website owner and possibly also the supplier thought they had already fixed. So this has to do with legal requirements, and it is kind of an issue, I think, that the the procurers of web content or web design or web development, they think that they have something that is accessible, and the suppliers may think that they deliver something accessible, or maybe they don't, but they claim that they do. But then when we test it with actual users, it doesn't work anyway. So there is, again, this huge gap in knowledge and experience. All of them also have either already started to remediate the issues that was reported during the project, or they have made a plan for remediation, because everything is not something you can just jump on and change directly, but you may need to change your whole graphical design system, or there is a technical aspect to it that means that it may be more efficient to make an update or to make these changes when you do the next update or upgrade of your system. But all of them say that they got actionable feedback, and this is something they can work on in the future. So they were very, very happy and thankful for being part of this project. And of course, it's consulting for free, so it's very good for the pilots, definitely. The majority also say that they will use this kind of user panels in their upcoming work. Not all of them thought it would be possible, but they say that they would at least consider using testers or test panels in their upcoming development. And the reason that some couldn't promise that they will do is that they say that they don't have the funding for it, or there is no human resources to actually interpret what the end users find, or they claim time constraints. And some of the local governments in Åland are very, very small, so they simply don't have the bandwidth. They claim not to have the bandwidth to do this. But again, very, very positive results also from all the pilots that were in the project. So we have a lot of material on this, but I just picked a couple of things that we got from the students, some feedback. So one recurring thing, and also what some of the students said was the best thing when we asked them what they liked most of the training, was really the better understanding they get on other people's needs. And this is, of course, very rewarding for us, because we think this is one of the important parts of what we wanted to achieve. And it's also something we got confirmation from many of the users that that was kind of a aha movement, that they learned something new. It's very easy to be very kind of siloed in your own disability needs group. Also, we had very positive response on the course as such. So we had different variations of, I hope this course will be permanent, or I hope this course will be provided again. I would like to do the next step, and so on. And I mean, it was a project, and the concept of a project is that it has a start and an end. So we cannot continue with this, but we hope to be able to do more courses like this in the future. And at least we know that we have some very strong supporters who would like to continue and learn more. And several of them also said that they would like this course to be provided for everyone, not only persons with disabilities, but really they think that many users, no matter of their ability or previous knowledge, would benefit from a course like this, which is an interesting idea, of course. And many of the users also said that it had been very informative, that they learned something new, that they feel empowered, and it was exciting to do work in this way with the group and so on. So I think we had, in general, very, very, very positive student feedback as well. From the pilots, we got that it was extremely valuable and like a reality check. So not only kind of the policy and the technical requirements and the law, but it's actually now it's kind of really a reality check to check with real users, and that has kind of an additional value to expert testing that many of the pilots came back with. We also had different ways of saying that this is how we should always work. This is how we should have always worked. This is something we would like to implement. And again, depending on resources and time and so on, but they all saw an added value of having user feedback in kind of the process or the way of working, which is of course very positive as well. And then quite a few also said that it's very much more powerful or more efficient to have real users providing feedback. And they said it's easier to get our management to understand this. And this is where the content creators who are usually not very interested in this, they think it's just a hassle to make things accessible. But when they understand that there's a human behind this, then now we got them working. And we have also had a couple of the pilots who used the video recordings from the report meeting and had a kind of a group meeting internally with them and discussing what all the users said. So they have been using it in many different ways. And I think that internal process going on after the piloting is going to be the most maybe interesting. And we hope to do also a follow-up even when the project has ended. We would like to get back to these organizations in 6 months or so and see how they are working with accessibility at this time, because we hope for a kind of a big change that will continue also after the project has ended. So with that, I think we have reached the end of this presentation, and we'll be happy to respond to any questions if there is any questions from the audience. So we have one question here. Can you give an example of how the lived experience can become a job or a career? Well, that was the whole idea of the project. So by basing the training on the lived experience, because we think, and I think this project and many other projects as well has proved that is correct, that if you combine your lived experience with a little bit of knowledge on the requirements and how to test things, and you kind of add a layer of expertise or more in-depth knowledge to your lived experience, that can lead to a career path when it comes to web accessibility. And that could be as a consultant, it could be as a tester, it could be hired by the public authority in this case, or any organization that has a website that would like to be accessible or working with accessibility, or it could be, of course, as part of an accessibility expert company, or it could even be part of a generalist ICT company that has maybe a smaller group or a team focusing on accessibility. So I think there are many ways that the lived experience can end up in a job or a career in different ways, and that is what we hope to achieve with this. And I think it's also proven that it actually works. Next question: how many of the tests that were done by the participants can be done automatically? So here somebody wants to take out the participants from from this whole thing. I have not, we didn't think about that, but I mean, some of these tests can definitely be tested automatically, of course, but not all of them. I don't have the statistics in my head. I would need to calculate on that. But I think the whole point with doing tests with users rather than doing it automatically is that you get the added value of the personal way of looking at things. I mean, first of all, automatic testing can only do so much, but also it becomes kind of black and white. And what the users really provide is the added value of being a real human, which is that, okay, this kind of technically works, but I still find it very difficult. We had quite a few of examples where we had more than one of the participants saying, this is really difficult. And I had to say, but unfortunately, that is not a legal requirement. So, and knowing, understanding that we are meeting the law, but still we have several user groups who have problem with this. I think that is something that is very useful and valuable for the website owners to understand, that the law is the minimum requirement. That is what the standard and the law requires. But if you really want to make sure that users can actually use the interface, then more may be needed. But I will have to come back to exactly how many of the tests could be automized. I do not have that in my head, so sorry. Next question. Considering this seems like a the trainer scenario, were the attendees paid and were they asked how they felt about receiving payment for their service? So no, this is not a train the trainer. That is not what we are doing. This is train the persons who would potentially do audits. So this was not a train the trainer scenario. I'm sorry if I said something that could be interpreted like that. But of course, when we or any other serious actor in this field are letting people with disabilities do testing for us or for clients, of course they are paid. I mean, everything else would be crazy. The expertise that a person with disability has is just as useful and valuable as any other expert. So of course they must be paid always. But this was a research project, so that was not the situation here. Next question, can you share some examples of the most frequent accessibility issues that users pointed out? We had 21 requirements and we saw difficulties in all of these. We had a lot on forms. Of course, forms are always difficult. On error messages, we had a lot with the colors and contrasts, and we had lacking or bad alternative texts, of course. But a lot of things really more on the cognitive side. So what is not understandable and how the logic is done. And also we had some examples of websites where the navigation was difficult to detect because there were different levels or different kinds of navigation and so on. So they detected many different things, and that is the really cool things with having 15 people testing at the same time, is that you get so many things that you didn't see yourself. That is really, I think, the takeaway from our side is that they also detected things, or they found things difficult that maybe our experts wouldn't have found, because we are very focused on the actual requirement. But there are so many layers of things that that can be difficult. But of course, we had people with visual impairments and who were medically blind, and a wide range of cognitive disabilities and also intellectual disabilities and motor impairments. So that means that the focus was on these things. For example, in this group, unfortunately, we did not have any sign language users, so we could not get that perspective. So I think the number of barriers or issues that they found is really based on their own knowledge, and that is, of course, why you would need kind of an expert or an expert view on the thing as well, so that you don't end up in only, quote unquote, getting the results of what the end users would discover, because that will always be heavily based on their own knowledge and experiences and so on. But I don't think that they found anything else or kind of different than what an expert audit would have done. But the additional things, I think, is the most interesting part, which has a lot to do with understandability. Next question, did the participant find it difficult to understand the legal difference between accessibility and usability or user experience? Yes or no. I think we started on very broadly saying just, pinpoint everything you find difficult, and then we have the discussion on whether we can kind of box this in as a legal requirement or not. So we went through the law and the standard, but the idea was not for them to understand every nitty-gritty detail of that, but rather to say, this is where I have my problems. And then we could say, okay, this particular issue is actually a legal requirement. So, this we can kind of put a fail on. This one is not, but it's still a valid point, of course, and it's something we can recommend around. And I don't think that was, sometimes they reacted like, why isn't that a requirement, or that should be a requirement? And I agree on that sometimes, but I don't think we didn't really discuss on I mean, this is not a legal training, so that was not really the focus, but we tried to describe exactly how to test things and where the kind of the fringe or the limitations were, the border issues, and I think we got a good understanding of most of it. Of course, some of the participants who were kind of less tech savvy sometimes had difficulties in understanding what this requirement really means, or if this is a pass or fail. But I don't think it was the question of is it a kind of a soft recommendation or the legal issue. It was more difficulties in interpreting what the test result actually was, or what is this this test result. You know, I got this result, but I can't really interpret if it's a pass or fail. I think that was more the case. And we had a mix-up sometimes of the requirements around of some of the visual things like use of color, of course, that can sometimes be difficult to interpret, kind of, you know, where the real boundaries are. So I think we have time for another question or two. Are you going to make a follow-up? Yes, we hope so. We always want to do more of this. We think this is one of the most important projects that we do. I tend to say that about all our projects, but I really think this is it is important to provide empowerment and the possibility to work on web accessibility for this user group, and we really enjoy working on it, and I hope that we can provide more courses like this. But we are a not-for-profit foundation. We can only do this if and when we get funding. So we would need to first see what kind of funding instruments there are, and if we have the chance to do it more times, I'm sure we will. And we also got a request to do something similar, but for another target group, which is the website owners instead. So training them, which is a way of kind of really putting this all of the idea on its head, but we are also discussing doing that as a kind of a follow-up in the same funding instrument. So this is a longer one. In addition to sharing the recording and transcript, are you considering sharing your curriculum? This would be great to have to use to expand accessibility knowledge amongst all staff, as I believe maximizing accessibility is part of everyone's role in the organization. As we work with agencies to mentor them in accessibility, these agencies are seeking more on how to understand and test. Well, yes and no. I mean, most of this is open to everyone. It will be reported as part of the requirements for the funding instrument. But really, the kind of the core of the project, I think, is really the discussions and what is happening live. So I don't think it's possible to just take kind of the project results and provide that to another agency and make sense of it. I don't really think that that's not really how the documentation will look, unfortunately. I think that there are other EU-funded projects and also other training activities out there, and also documented things from, for example, W3C that could be more useful if there is an agency that wants to learn about these things. There are several free tools out there and material that can be used. 29. I think this is too long. So I will start with thanking you everyone for this, for all the questions. Unfortunately, we couldn't do all of them today as usual, even if we have a whole hour. But thank you for being interested. We will send you also, everyone that was registered for today, a link when we have the documentation of the reports and all the submissions approved by Interreg. We will provide them. They will be published and of course, free of charge and so on, downloadable from our website. So I'll make sure that you have all the documentation when it is published and up there. So our upcoming Free Friday webinars, next week we have a longer one again. That is kind of a bonus thing, which is in Swedish only, which is our accessibility update that we do for the mainly focusing on the disabled persons organizations. Everyone is welcome, of course, but it's called Funkisträff, where we provide information on a couple of projects that we have just started or got funded. And we are also then hearing from some of the users actually in this project who will provide their knowledge and expertise and feedback from attending this course. So that's a 2-hour webinar next Friday starting at 1 o'clock. And we will have several speakers, both project leaders from all these different projects and also some end users. And then Friday on the 11th of April, we are back again to the normal bi-weekly Free Friday webinar series, 1:30, this one in English. And this is a follow-up on what my brilliant colleague Malin Hammarberg, who is a senior UX designer and accessibility expert at the foundation, she did a month ago or so. She did The Best in Life is Free and described different free testing tools that you can use to test accessibility, automatic or quasi-automatic. And then we had a request to do another one of those, but focusing on mobile apps. So this is what we will do on the 11th of April, where Malin will go through her favorite tools for testing mobile apps. So with that, we have run 1 minute over time. I'm sorry for that. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a wonderful Friday afternoon. Bye-bye.